Senate will come to order. Chaplain Dr. Black will lead the Senate in prayer.
Thank you. Let us pray. O God, our shield, the giver of victory and honor, shine on us with your kindness that brings a rich harvest of joy. Today, guide our lawmakers with your Spirit. Complete the work you have begun in them and lead them by the power of your prevailing providence. May they trust you completely, permitting you to remove obstacles from the road ahead. Lord, train them in your school of humility so they will walk safely without stumbling. Help them to remember that all efforts to defend themselves will fail without your grace and mercy. Inspire them to seek your will in all they do. We pray in your magnificent name. Amen.
Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session and resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will now report.
Nomination, the Judiciary, Matthew E. Orso of North Carolina to be United States District Judge for the Western District.
Senator from Iowa.
If you watch television, you're hearing a lot of reports from Nigeria about kidnappings and murders, other reports of violence, and particularly you're hearing it about Christians in Nigeria. This violence has grown more frequent and more troubling as time goes on. The enforcement of blasphemy laws by the Nigerian government, coupled with the rise of violent attacks by terrorists against religious communities, represents a serious infringement upon the freedom of religion that you're supposed to have in that country. Blasphemy laws are enforced in 12 Nigerian states and also at the federal level. That enforcement is resulting in the prosecution and imprisonment of Christians, Muslims, traditional practitioners, and even humanists. Furthermore, violence by terrorists like Boko Haram and the other organization called the Islamic State West Africa Province continues to pose serious security challenges. Unfortunately, these challenges are not new development. For years, we've been hearing from our own government agencies, particularly the FBI and the Department of Justice, urging our own State Department to designate the terrorist group Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization, a step that was delayed until 2013. For my part, I have consistently sought information and action to address this ongoing threat. Going way back almost 10 years in 2016, I sent a letter to then U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch requesting information regarding the years-long process of designating the Nigerian Islamist group Boko Haram as a foreign terrorist organization. In 2020, I wrote to then Secretary Pompeo and Ambassador Sam Brownback asking what steps were being taken to protect Christians in Nigeria and whether a special envoy might be appointed. At that time, the department assured me that they were actively addressing the issue at multiple levels with the Nigerian government. But now, years later, we continue to see concerning reports about violence and religious persecution in Nigeria. And that is why I was so very happy to see our own President Trump take long-awaited action in designating Nigeria a country of particular concern. That designation puts Nigeria on a watch list, puts Nigeria on notice that if they don't take care of this situation, other things can intervene. The Nigerian government must take immediate action to end this violence, and the United States should do all it can to support and encourage those efforts. And once again, I'm proud to see President Trump on television at his news conferences and things like that, speaking up for Nigerian government to take action and supporting the plight of Christians in Nigeria. I yield the floor. I don't need a copy of this.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Mr. President.
Republican Leader.
Thank you. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, we are 4 weeks away from the new year and from the date that the 2017 tax relief for Americans was set to expire. Back in 2017, of course, Republicans passed a huge tax relief package. We lowered tax rates for every income group. We doubled the child tax credit, and we nearly doubled the standard deduction. But all of that was scheduled to expire at the end of this year. And without action, Americans would have seen their tax rates increase and the child tax credit shrink by 50%. A typical family would have seen its taxes go up by about $1,700 a year. In my state of South Dakota, a typical family would have seen a $2,500 tax increase. Republicans were determined not to let that happen. And so a priority for 2025 became extending the 2017 tax relief, but not just extending it, making it permanent. We didn't want hardworking Americans to have to worry every few years that their tax bills are suddenly going to soar. And so in July, we passed the Working Families Tax Cut to make permanent the 2017 tax relief. We made those lower tax rates permanent. We made the increased standard deduction permanent. And we made the increased child tax credit permanent. But Mr. President, we didn't stop there. We expanded the child tax credit even further and indexed it to inflation so that its value will never go down. We also further increased the standard deduction, exempting additional money from Americans' taxable income. And we added a new $6,000 bonus deduction for seniors, allowing Americans on Social Security to keep more of their money. And that's still not all, Mr. President. We eliminated taxes on tips for millions of tipped workers, Uber and Lyft drivers, hairstylists, delivery drivers, servers at restaurants. We also eliminated taxes on overtime pay for millions of hourly workers. Thanks to this provision, everyone from nurses and police officers to firefighters and paramedics will be able to keep more of their hard-earned money. And we did still more. Because one aspect of prosperity is being able to keep more of what you earn. Another aspect is being able to earn more. And so in addition to the individual tax relief, we also made permanent some of the 2017 tax law's business tax relief to help businesses grow and create new jobs and opportunities for workers. That included the lower tax rates for small and medium-sized businesses, the job-creating 199A small business deduction, and full expensing for new equipment and for domestic research and development. And again, we went beyond the 2017 tax relief and added full expensing for new factories and factory improvements so we can expect to see more goods made in America. And again, more jobs and opportunities for American workers. We also acted to protect countless family farms, ranches, and small businesses from the punitive death tax and all of the headaches and expense that come with planning for it. Mr. President, I'm incredibly proud of what we were able to accomplish for hardworking Americans. We not only averted a massive tax hike on American families, but were able to further lessen Americans' tax burden. And hardworking Americans can be assured that Republicans will continue to work to enhance affordability, expand opportunity, and increase prosperity. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Democrat leader.
I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, last night, Americans once again went to the polls in an election where affordability, how much people have to pay for the things they really need, was the driving issue. A deep red Tennessee district that Trump won by 22 points swung by double digits in Democrats' direction. Mr. President, last night was the latest flashing red light indicating that Americans are fed up with Republican policies, particularly how much they have to pay for the things they really need. Donald Trump doesn't get it. At yesterday's cabinet meeting, Donald Trump once again doubled down on the bizarre claim that the affordability issue is somehow a hoax. Yeah, maybe it's a hoax for a billionaire like him and all his cronies who never have to worry about how much they have to pay for the things they need. But American people have to worry, and worry about it every week when the bills come in and they say my income isn't equal to what I need to buy. And the costs are going up and up and up, in large part, in good part, because of Donald Trump and his administration's policies. So when Donald Trump says that affordability is somehow a hoax, he is on a different planet than the average American. At his cabinet meeting, he called affordability a fake narrative, a con job. He said affordability doesn't mean anything to anybody. What a bubble he's in. He doesn't understand how the average person struggles each week, each month to pay the bills. Of all the ways Donald Trump could respond to people's worry about the high cost of living, he's chosen the worst strategy. He's telling Americans they're imagining things. Donald Trump, a man who lived his entire life in the kind of luxury most people could never wrap their heads around, is pretending the high costs somehow don't exist. A man who is a multi-billionaire and the President of the United States, who's supposed to know what's on people's minds, is telling people that high costs that they pay each week don't exist. Well, their pocketbooks feel it, their wallets feel it, their bank accounts feel it. Maybe things are going great if you're rich like Donald Trump, but for everyone else, things are getting worse, not better, when it comes to paying for stuff. In a recent Axios-CBS poll, half of Americans said food is harder to purchase this year than it was a year ago. That doesn't sound like a hoax, not to people who go to the supermarket every week and have trouble and look at those bills and say, how the hell did they get so high? Sounds rather, not like a hoax, which Donald Trump seems to think it is, but a big problem every week for American families, the high cost of groceries and what they buy at the supermarket. 74% of Americans now say that the economy is either poor or just fair. Consumer confidence, one of the watchwords of how good our economy is going to do in the future, is sinking. This holiday season, the price of an 8-pound bone-in spiral ham is up nearly 50% compared to last year. 50% for a traditional Christmas dish. Beef prices are up 15% compared to last year. Canned vegetables are more expensive because tariffs made the packaging more costly, even when those vegetables are grown here. Even something simple as aluminum foil is up 40% compared to last year. So Donald Trump, hear the American people, affordability, the high cost of paying for things is not a hoax. People are struggling to pay for the things they need. And it's because of Donald Trump and his disastrous policies. His tariffs have effectively taxed each household around $2,000 a year. Tariffs sent retail coffee prices up 40% in September alone. And those tariffs were placed on places like Brazil. We don't grow coffee here in America. So what the hell is there a tariff doing there? Except it's a tax. That's the way Trump taxes people. Tariffs have poisoned American manufacturing. This week, the Wall Street Journal reported that manufacturing has contracted for 9 months in a row. Manufacturing, one of the lifebloods of America, is declining every month for the last 9 months. And what's the reason? Ask manufacturers. Tariffs are the #1 cause. Producers say it's getting more expensive to source the material they need. They simply need to make their products. It's very simple. And then, when it comes for people, things that Americans need, health care is way at the top of the list. Every American knows they want to have health care. God forbid they, their spouse, their loved one, their kids, their parents become ill or sick. They want to know there's some kind of safety net there for them. But Trump and the Republicans don't seem to realize that. In just 28 days, the ACA tax credits are set to expire. Next year, tens of millions of Americans will see their health care premiums skyrocket, 20 million by an average of 114%, those on ACA, and need those benefits, need those credits. And millions more, even on private insurance, are going to pay a whole lot more too. I just had a friend I know who works for a big company, and the company told him that you're going to have to pay $450 more a month for your health insurance because the insurers are charging the health company more, all because of the expiration of the ACA credit. This is not theoretical. Higher premiums mean real pain, real suffering for real people, most of them, in fact, in red states. Yesterday, the American Cancer Society found that virtually every single cancer patient who relies on ACA tax credits, 96%, said they'll struggle to get the care they need if the credits expire. Republicans are literally telling cancer patients, you're on your own. Telling someone from cancer, you're on your own because I want to give tax breaks to billionaires? How un-American is that? How against what Americans need, want, desire is that? Republicans have clearly sent America barreling towards a health care cliff. And the Republicans are divided. Democrats, we're united on health care. One House Republican, though, said that the Republicans are nowhere on health care. That's right. On health care, Republicans are divided, Democrats are united. And the divisions on the Republican side are severe. One day, the White House says they'll release some grand plan to address the problem. The next day, congressional Republicans say hell no and shoot the White House plans down, and Trump backs off. Republicans can't agree on whether to dismantle the ACA or privatize the whole system, or just keep attacking women's health because it plays well with their hard-right anti-choice base. Forget not being on the same page on health care. Republicans aren't even reading from the same book. And while Republicans continue fighting with each other, the American people are left holding the bill. So I've said, as is said many times before, when it comes to health care, Republicans are divided among themselves and divided from what the American people overwhelmingly want. 55% of Trump voters want to restore the ACA credits. Democrats are united on lowering premiums. We're united on lowering costs. We're united on helping Americans pay for the things they need. Republicans, meanwhile, they're paralyzed. Paralyzed by their divisions, paralyzed by their own extremism, and it'll be Americans who will pay the price when premiums go up. And they know who's to blame. They know why. On Hegseth, it's been almost a week since a report came out saying Secretary Hegseth potentially ordered the indiscriminate killings of survivors clinging to a vessel in the Caribbean. And we still do not know the truth, because Pete Hegseth has not released the full tapes of the strike. It's an incredibly serious matter. It's about the safety of our troops. This is an incident that could expose our members of the armed forces to legal consequences. And yet the American public and the Congress are still not hearing the basic facts. So once again, Secretary Hegseth, you need to do the right thing, tell the truth, release the full unedited tapes of the September 2nd boat strike. Only then will Americans know the truth, because no one believes Hegseth. Until Secretary Hegseth releases the full tapes, the American people cannot trust what he says. Secretary Hegseth's story, the White House's story, the Pentagon's story keeps changing every day. How can you believe him when the story keeps changing? The day after the boat strikes, Hegseth said on Fox News he watched the operation live. He told us in person that he was in the room, that he was part of the operation, but then yesterday, he totally reversed himself and said he didn't see the second strike everybody's wondering about. He now says that he left in the middle of the operation, that a couple of hours passed before he was made aware that a second strike had even been necessary. He blamed, quote, the fog of war. A couple of hours? What could have been possibly more important than Secretary Hegseth went missing for 2 hours during a military strike against an alleged drug trafficker or traffickers? What is Secretary Hegseth hiding? The American people are asking. The Congress is asking. Republican senators and congressmen are asking Secretary Hegseth, what are you hiding? Why does his story keep changing? Why won't he release the tapes? The tapes will show the American people what really happened on September 2nd, and the American people and every person serving in our military deserves to hear the truth. I yield the floor.
Republican Whip.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, on Thanksgiving Day, 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom should have been at home celebrating the holiday with her family. Instead, she lost her life, murdered one day before Thanksgiving. Her killer is an Afghan national, someone Joe Biden flew into this country and without proper vetting. Sarah served in the West Virginia National Guard. She wore the uniform of the United States Army. She was murdered on American soil by someone who never should have been here. This is the tragic cost of Joe Biden's open border policies. It's also a sign of national security weakness. For 4 years, Joe Biden and pro-crime Democrats turned our border into a New York City subway turnstile. No fare enforced, just hop right on in. It was routine for 10,000 illegal immigrants to flood across our nation's southern border on a daily basis. Criminals, gang members, drug traffickers, terrorists, they all came in. For these failed policies, Americans have paid the price. Laken Riley in Georgia, Rachel Morin in Maryland, many others. Today, President Trump and Republicans are ending the chaos, secured the border in record time, and are getting America back on track. We acted fast. We started here in the Senate with the Laken-Riley Act. It was the first piece of legislation President Trump signed into law. It mandates that illegal immigrant criminals be detained and removed. Republicans ended catch and release. We stopped the illegal invasion into our country. For the past 6 months, zero illegal immigrants have been released into our country. Under Joe Biden, it was often 10,000 a day. For the first time in 17 years, the backlog of immigration cases is actually going down. Immigration judges can finally do their job. Open border, rubber stamping judges are gone. Interior enforcement is making our communities safer. 70% of ICE arrests are illegal immigrant criminals. They're individuals charged with or convicted of crimes in the United States. During the week of Thanksgiving, ICE worked overtime. They arrested a convicted murderer in California, a convicted rapist in Tennessee, and a convicted drug trafficker in Delaware. Every one of these arrests makes our country safer. These criminals are many more are off our streets because Republicans have acted. Didn't just secure the border for today, we've secured it into the future. Because in July, Republicans passed and President Trump signed into law the largest border security investment in American history, $170 billion. The law finishes the wall. It provides $75 billion for ICE. It gives our agents the resources that they need to continue to deport illegal immigrant criminals. Our law helps train, hire, and retain Border Patrol agents. It even gives them a bonus. Republicans have made a generational investment in American border security. Every Democrat in the Senate voted against it. Republicans voted to deport illegal immigrant criminals. Democrats voted to keep them in our communities. Republicans voted to secure the border. Democrats voted to keep it wide open. Republicans voted to hire Border Patrol agents. Democrats voted for free health care for illegal immigrants. The danger from Joe Biden's open policies remains today, and it's serious, because millions of illegal immigrants are still here. Among them are criminals, cartel members, drug dealers, and terrorist suspects. We're tracking them down, we're sending them home. The damage that Democrats have inflicted on our country runs deeper than most Americans realize, more than they know. Let's look at the situation right now in Minnesota. This week, the New York Times reported that immigrants from Somalia living in Minnesota have been defrauding American taxpayers out of $1 billion. $1 billion. Living in Minnesota, immigrants from Somalia. Investigators from the magazine City Journal found where the stolen money went. As they say, follow the money. According to their reporting, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab, which is, as you know, is a terrorist organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda, the largest funder of Al-Shabaab is the Minnesota taxpayer. How could that be? How can it be that American taxpayers are funding a group affiliated with Al-Qaeda? Taxpayers didn't even know it, weren't aware of it. Here's how the scheme worked. Fraudsters created fake companies that exist only on paper. They billed the government for services never provided, or they enrolled children in programs that they didn't need. Then they funneled the stolen money out of our country. Some went to buy luxury cars and real estate. Some went directly to Al-Shabaab. This was organized, systemic theft. It went on for years under Democrat leadership, and then it exploded under Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and her vice presidential nominee, Tim Walz, the current governor of Minnesota. No one stopped it until President Trump was elected. Then this is what happened. In June, President Trump appointed Joe Thompson as the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Minnesota. Thompson immediately began bringing charges. So far, dozens of defendants have been charged. This is what Thompson discovered. He said, what we see are schemes stacked upon schemes, draining resources meant for those in need. Meant for those in need. Safety net programs, draining those resources. The depth of the fraud, he went on, takes my breath away. It should take away the breath of all Americans when they see what was going on in Minnesota. The most fascinating thing is it didn't take the breath away of the Minnesota governor, Tim Walz. No. On Sunday, he was on Meet the Press, talking to the nation. You'd think he would have expressed outrage. Nope. He made excuses. Instead of condemning the fraud, condemning the theft, condemning the funneling of taxpayer monies overseas to a terrorist organization, he claimed the problem was President Trump. Must be back on his old talking points from the campaign, where President Trump won in a landslide. Walz said we need to be careful about how we talk. Think about that. American taxpayer dollars funding terrorism funneled out of the country, and Democrats want us to be careful about how we talk. He's worried about our tone. Here's what the Minnesota governor will not tell you. Many of those charged have close ties to Minnesota Democrats. He don't want you to look over there. Oh, no. Including the Socialist Squad member, Representative Omar. That's why Democrats want to sweep it under the rug, want to hide it from public view, want to say, no, look at President Trump, don't look at us. This is what's wrong, Mr. President. When Democrats prioritize open borders, what do we get? Waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. And the Democrats look the other way. Because President Trump won, we're bringing these criminals to justice. According to the latest Harvard-Harris poll, 8 in 10 Americans support deporting illegal immigrant criminals. That includes 7 in 10 Democrats. Not sure how many of those would fit in this Senate chamber on the Democrat side of the aisle, but in terms of 7 in 10 Democrats across the country are supportive of the deportation of illegal immigrant criminals. 3 in 4 Americans want the government to eliminate waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. Not sure who doesn't want us to eliminate that, but 3 out of 4 Americans say get rid of it, and I agree. 7 in 10 Americans also support closing the border with enhanced security, and that's exactly what we're doing. It's not complicated. Americans oppose illegal immigration, they support border security, and they want criminal illegal immigrants removed. Republicans work for the American people, not for the open border activists across the aisle. Americans deserve secure borders, deserve safe communities. That's what Republicans are continuing to deliver. We're securing Americans' borders, we're protecting American families, and we are making America safer. Thank you, Mr. President. Waive the mandatory quorum clause with respect to the Orso and the Rodriguez nominations.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Democrat whip.
Mr. President, in my office here in the United States Capitol, which is a few steps away from this chamber, I have behind my desk a credenza. And on that credenza is a document that is dear to me and my family and really defines who I am. It's my mother's naturalization certificate. Despite all the speeches you hear on the floor about immigrants, we are a nation of immigrants, and my mother was an immigrant from Lithuania to the United States, brought here at the age of 2. Her brother and sister were with her on that boat, and her mom was bringing them along. They went from Lithuania to Germany and then took the ship to Baltimore, eventually catching a train that took them to what they considered to be the land of opportunity, my hometown of East St. Louis, Illinois. That's my story. That's my family's story. It's an immigrant story, and I'm proud of it. There are problems with immigration throughout our history, but there is also an opportunity with immigration which we've taken advantage of over and over and over again. We are a nation of immigrants. You'll hear many of the speeches, and even this morning, from the other side of the aisle of what's wrong with immigrants and immigration. It is not a perfect system by any means. But I think we can all agree on some basics. Whoever the president may be, whatever political party, we need an orderly process at the border when it comes to immigrants, number one. Number two, we should never knowingly allow any dangerous person to come into the United States. Number three, anyone who is here seeking citizenship and is a danger to the community or neighborhood they live in should be removed from the United States, period, end of quote. And finally, we need a process that allows people who have the best intentions to come here, work hard, pay their taxes, and be part of America's future. That's the story of my family. It's a story of millions of American families. Mr. President, about 25 years ago, a young woman in Chicago contacted my office and asked for help. Her name was Teresa Lee. An interesting story. Teresa was born in Korea. She came to the United States through South America, and her father and mother brought her to Chicago, where her father, a Protestant minister, was looking for a church to serve. He spent many years doing that with limited success, and he brought along his little daughter, Teresa, with him as he visited these churches. Many times when the services were not taking place, this little girl would go over to the beat-up old piano in each of these churches and start hammering away. Someone noticed that and invited her to be part of something called the Merit Music Program in Chicago. The Merit Music Program provides money for poor kids in public schools to buy instruments and take lessons and learn how to play. They decided to give Teresa that chance. They let her take lessons in piano. She turned out to be a child prodigy when it came to music. And so at the end of her high school years, her friends and those who taught her encouraged her to apply to the very best music schools in America. Teresa applied to the Manhattan Conservatory of Music, but she had a problem. Filling out the application, there was a question: what is your citizenship? She turned to her parents and said, "What do I put here?" They said, "We don't know. You came here on a visitor's visa. We didn't renew the request for a permanent visa. We don't know what your status may be." "What are we going to do?" she said. They said, "We're going to call the office of a U.S. Senator named Durbin and see if he can give us advice." We checked the law, and the law was clear. Teresa had overstayed her visitor visa. She was in the United States as a child, grew up here, but she didn't have legal status. She was undocumented. The law was and is very clear. That 18-year-old girl had to leave the United States for 10 years and then apply to come back in. When we found that out, my staff came to me and said, "This isn't even possible for her to do. She's never really lived any other place than the United States." And so at that point, I decided to address this with legislation. It was 24 years ago that I introduced a measure called the DREAM Act. And what the DREAM Act basically said, that these young immigrants brought to the United States as children, like any American child, were destined to grow up dreaming of getting their first job, passing their driver's license test, and applying to college. But they had a problem. Under the current law, they were not legal to do those things. And so the DREAM Act gave them a chance, if brought to the United States as children, to have a path to citizenship after earning their way in a rather long and rigorous process. Many of them did. These dreamers have gone on to serve as our nation's doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers, and first responders over the last 24 years. But unlike many of their peers, dreamers live in fear that their lives will be uprooted and they will be deported to a country they don't even call home. That was the threat that faced Teresa. It was 2001 when I first introduced bipartisan legislation to provide dreamers with a pathway to citizenship. My co-sponsor was Republican Senator Orrin Hatch, who was then chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. In fact, we had a little argument as to who would be the lead name on the legislation. Since he was chairman of Judiciary, I deferred to him, and the first DREAM Act was a Hatch-Durbin piece of legislation. I'm sad to say that more than 2 decades later, Dreamers are still waiting for that bill to pass. Just over 13 years ago, President Barack Obama created the Deferred Action for Children Arrivals Program, widely known as DACA. He created DACA in response to a bipartisan request from myself and the late Indiana Republican Senator Richard Lugar. Over the 13 years, DACA has protected more than 830,000 young people from deportation. All of them were brought to this country as children, some as young as a few months old. Sadly, since President Obama established the program, many Republicans have waged a relentless campaign to overturn DACA and deport these dreamers back to countries they left as infants, toddlers, and children, countries they may not even remember. Now this program is hanging by a thread in the courts due to legal challenges from Republican state attorneys general. And many dreamers, even those who have the protections under DACA, have been caught up in deportation raids by the Trump administration. What does a person in DACA have to do to qualify for that status? First, report themselves to our government. Second, submit themselves to a background check. So if there is any evidence of criminal wrongdoing, it's going to come out and they'll be disqualified. They have to pay a substantial fee, and every 2 years they have to go through that process again and again and again. That is what DACA is. So when we hear stories on the floor about immigrants committing crimes and such, let's make it clear. The dreamers are cleared by review and investigation by our government before they can ever qualify for the program, and every 2 years they have to submit their names again for review. I want to tell you about one of these dreamers. She's a college student with a merit scholarship. She was deported from the United States without due process 2 weeks ago. This is the 150th story of a dreamer that I have highlighted on the Senate floor. I had hoped that we would pass the DREAM Act long before I reached this milestone. Ani Lucia Lopez Belozo was brought to the United States from Honduras when she was 8 years old. Ani worked hard in high school. She was an honor student. In her free time, she volunteered as a tutor in algebra. Her hard work ultimately paid off. This year, she received a merit scholarship to study at Babson College in Massachusetts. Like a lot of college students, Ani planned to visit her family during the Thanksgiving holiday. Her dad's employer in Texas paid for her travel home to surprise her dad at work. But when Miss Lopez Beloza arrived at Boston's Logan Airport, she was told there was a problem with her ticket. When she went to customer service, she was surrounded by federal agents and shackled. The next day, a federal district court judge issued an order blocking her transfer of deportation for 72 hours. Despite this court order, the Trump administration quickly deported her to Honduras, a country she had not been to since she was a little girl. She had nothing but a few belongings she brought with her for the Thanksgiving holiday at home with her family in Texas. You remember the president's campaign and rallies, and how often he stood before cheering crowds and said it's time to stop the rapist, murderers, terrorists, and criminally insane from flowing into this nation. The worst of the worst, he repeated over and over again. Does this young lady look like the worst of the worst? The answer is clearly no. Ms. Lopez Beloza is one of countless dreamers who have great potential to make this a better country. They're not asking for a free ride. They are hardworking and determined. Think of the odds against her as she was growing up. She came to know that she didn't have legal status in this country. Her family is a hardworking family with limited income, and the prospects of her ever getting admitted to a college were limited. And yet she was damn determined to do it, and she did. It's that kind of determination, talent, and skill that should be part of this country's future. She's going to be someday, I'm sure, a leader in America, a small business owner, a teacher, a doctor, I'm not certain what it will be. The vast majority of Americans, including most Republicans, agree that dreamers like her should have a path to citizenship, to earn her way to citizenship, to work hard and prove that she's part of America's future. This is not just the right thing to do for dreamers and their families. It's the right thing to do for America. One study found that if DACA were rescinded, the federal government would lose $60 billion in tax revenue and U.S. economic growth would shrink. The time to pass the DREAM Act is now. That is why I'm proud to announce that I'll be reintroducing the DREAM Act this week on a bipartisan basis with my good friend and colleague, Senator Lisa Murkowski, Republican of Alaska. While I've introduced the DREAM Act in every Congress since 2001, this one is different. This is my last year in the Senate. This is my last opportunity as a senator to make it the law. Over the years, I've met hundreds of amazing dreamers who are American in every sense of the word, except on paper. To those dreamers who've been with me in this fight, I promise to do everything in my power to fight for you and your future every day that I'm here. As I've said to you many times, I'm not giving up on you. Don't give up on me. And to Senator Murkowski, thank you. It took courage to co-sponsor this bill, and I will never forget it. Can we get to work on a bipartisan basis and agree that if we're going to keep safe borders, we also want to make sure that the right immigrants are here for our future? Ani is one of those people. Without due process, she was sent back to Honduras. Her fate is still uncertain, despite court order. But there are hundreds of thousands like her that with enough determination, hard work, and opportunity can make America a greater nation. She is my 150th dreamer. I hope she's part of America for years to come. I yield the floor.
Mr. President. I recognize the senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to speak for up to 15 minutes prior to the scheduled roll call votes.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've come to the floor this morning as we begin debate on two identical disapproval resolutions. This is Senate Joint Resolution 91. I filed it with Senator Sullivan, and then House Joint Resolution 131, which is a companion measure filed by our delegation colleague, Representative Begich. These resolutions would nullify the Biden administration's Coastal Plain oil and gas program. This was unilaterally rewritten and finalized over our objections back in November of 2024. We're going to have an opportunity to vote later to proceed, a motion to proceed to my Senate resolution. And then if that succeeds, our final vote tomorrow will be on the House resolution because it can then go directly to the President's desk. Those of us in the Alaska delegation filed these resolutions because we are, again, seeking to overturn the Biden administration's effort to effectively shut down resource production across Alaska. We opposed their Central Yukon Resource Management Plan, their Integrated Activity Plan for our National Petroleum Reserve, and their decision to shut down any potential development on a very small part of the coastal plain. So for those who have not followed this, the coastal plain is a 1.56 million acre tract of land. This is on the eastern slope of Alaska's North Slope. So if you look at the overlay here of Alaska across the lower 48 states, the ANWR region is up here in the upper eastern corner. The refuge itself is about 19 million acres. This is approximately the size of South Carolina. The non-wilderness area, this is the 1002 area, is 1.5 million acres, approximately the size of Delaware. So again, you see this in that section of the map there. But the coastal plain is part of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, but in designating that as a refuge, Congress specifically reserved this area up at the top on the slope there, specifically reserved the area for energy exploration and potential future development. And Congress did this through what was known as Section 1002 of the Alaska National Interest Land Conservation Act. We call it ANILCA. And so when we refer to the 1002 area, it is this coastal plain here within the ANWR region. Section 1002 of ANILCA starts with a purpose that explicitly authorizes, quote, exploratory activity within the coastal plain in a manner that avoids significant adverse effects on the fish and wildlife and other resources. And so I think it's important that people understand this purpose, this distinction. The 1002 area, this area here, the purple area, is not federal wilderness. By law, it is a federal set-aside. This area here is wilderness. This is the refuge area. The 1002 area, again, was specifically set aside to authorize exploratory activity. And then Congress left the decision on development to be determined later. And it was years, it was decades actually, it was in 2017, we in Congress agreed what should be allowed. I was chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee at the time, and we added a Title II to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. It drew bipartisan support, but we effectively put an end to a 40-year battle. We opened up a small fraction of the coastal plain to responsible development. And under the terms of that act, we required at least 2 area-wide lease sales over the course of 7 years, but we provided balance to all that. It wasn't just open the whole thing for exploration. We limited surface development to just 2,000 acres. So keep in mind, this area that's the size of Delaware, we limited surface development to 2,000 acres, which is 1/100th of a 1%. 1/100th of 1%, or 1/10,000th of all of ANWR. That's what we included within that measure in that 2017 Act. We did not shortcut or truncate the environmental review process. The Department of Interior effectively spent 3 years designing a sound, environmentally protective program. And the result then was a record of decision in August 2020 that would have allowed us to safely develop the area's anticipated resources while fully protecting the fish, the wildlife, and the subsistence uses. We've talked a lot on this floor and in other areas about the resources that we project to be in the ANWR area, prolific resources, an estimated 7.7 billion barrels of oil, which would be enough to add 500,000 barrels a day to our Trans-Alaska pipeline system for perhaps the next 40 years, to fill up our pipeline. I am one who has been engaged in this battle for decades, and I absolutely understand the concerns about whether or not limited development makes sense in the area. And like so much of Alaska, the coastal plain, this is a special place. None of us wants to see it harmed, and that's why we went to such extraordinary lengths to ensure that energy development and environmental protection could coexist. We didn't trade one for the other. We didn't put energy above the environment. We had a lot of confidence in the program that was finalized in 2020. But unfortunately, we never got the chance to once again demonstrate how Alaska leads the world when it comes to balanced, environmentally responsible development. We held our first lease sale in early 2021, but after that, everything seems to just kind of have gone in reverse. Because on his first day in office, President Biden suspended the Coastal Plain Program. His Department of Interior paused all leasing and development activities before arbitrarily canceling every lease in the area. And the Biden administration didn't stop there either. They next decided to rewrite the Coastal Plain Program to make leasing unattractive and development impossible. And they claimed deficiencies in the original process between 2017 and 2020 that they had to somehow go back and remedy, but they never really cited anything specific. Now keep in mind, the Biden administration, their political agenda did not include energy from Alaska. So they're trying to move forward and address what they said were flaws, but their process was also fatally flawed. For starters, the Biden administration failed to meaningfully consult with the people who actually live on the North Slope, including those who live in Kaktovik, which is the only community within ANWR's boundaries. And when I say failed, I mean they refused. They flat out refused. I added report language to my Interior Appropriations bill, directing them to do the consultation, and still they refused. The Biden administration issued a record of decision for a new Coastal Plain program in November of 2024. And if you spend time looking at it, you'll understand why we're here, because it clearly and repeatedly contradicts federal law. Because the Tax Cut and Jobs Act opened the 1.56 million acre coastal plain to potential development subject to the 2,000 acre surface limit. We were very clear in what that law was. And the Biden administration took that, flipped it on its head, and finalized a program that allowed leasing on just 400,000 acres. So gone immediately. Gone was potential leasing on 74% of the 1002 area. And the 400,000 acres that was left available, which is, I question the availability there, but it amounted to less than was bid on at the 2021 lease sale. And even there, 231,700 acres were subject to no surface occupancy. Another 84,300 were subject to controlled surface use, and 3,100 acres were subject to timing limitations. So only about 5% of the overall coastal plain was subject to standard lease terms and conditions under the Biden plan. So think about that, just 5% now. Biden administration also restricted seismic surveying, the best way to understand the coastal plain's resources. They restricted the surveying to the lands that were now theoretically available for leasing. They even reinterpreted the 2,000-acre limit to not be a saleable feature of leases. We had discussed this with the parliamentarians during the budget reconciliation back in 2017, but a matter of secretarial discretion to allow development of anywhere between 0 and 2,000 acres. So again, they flipped that on their head. So it wouldn't surprise you to learn that the 2024 program contemplates development on a maximum of 995 surface acres. And again, what we had statutorily prescribed, what the law says, was 2,000 acres. And then finally, the Biden administration expanded and created new lease stipulations and required operating procedures to further dissuade leasing interest and clamp down on any potential for development. And the goal wasn't hard to understand. It's evident in the 2024 record of decision. Interior acknowledged that under their preferred alternative, future oil production from the coastal plain would decline nearly 80%. They knew it, that was the plan. I think they were probably trying to shoot for closer to 100%. Under the 2024 plan, there would be no leasing, as we clearly saw in a lease sale that was designed to fail and then did fail late last year. There would be no development on the coastal plain regardless of congressional action, support from Alaskans who live on the North Slope and within the coastal plain, or our national need for responsibly produced energy. And bear in mind, this is all taking place right as the Biden administration was relaxing sanctions on countries like Iran, like Venezuela, allowing them to produce more and financially benefit from the development. And it also happened right as California, which is a traditional market for Alaska's oil, was importing more oil from the Middle East, which is a long way from California, but also from other countries in South America, actively deforesting the Amazon rainforest. So you want to talk about a massive geopolitical and environmental failure. That was it. That was it happening under that administration. Less oil from Alaska means a Trans-Alaska pipeline system that is running mostly empty. It means a West Coast that increasingly turns to imports instead of domestic energy, regardless of the terror that that breeds or the devastation that it causes. It also means fewer jobs for hardworking Alaskans, less opportunity in our communities for the folks who support and benefit from energy development, less revenue for the state of Alaska, and in turn, less infrastructure and services. And to me, that just makes no sense. The people of the North Slope, the Alaska delegation, and the state of Alaska were ignored as the Biden administration put its 2024 program into place. From the start, this was a fait accompli. There was no question in my mind what they planned to do, and there was nothing, unfortunately, that we were able to do to change their minds. And it really didn't matter what Alaskans wanted. It didn't matter what the law required. It didn't matter that they wound up in court and lost badly, as they did when a federal judge ruled that their cancellation of the coastal plain leases was blatantly illegal. But all of that was their choice, and this is ours. This is our choice to disapprove and permanently nullify their actions so that they never come back in substantially similar form. So if you care about the rule of law, if you care about our domestic energy security or the consequences of sending our dollars abroad for energy that we have here at home, then I would ask you to join us in supporting this resolution. I think if you If you acknowledge that no one cares more about Alaska than Alaskans, you should be with the full Alaska delegation on this. We can restore the rule of law. We can require federal agencies to follow congressional direction. We can return to balanced management on the coastal plain while still protecting 99.99% of ANWR's surface acreage. I think the choice is pretty clear. I would urge colleagues to support the motion to proceed later and the underlying resolution when we vote on it tomorrow. And Mr. President, I would ask, as I wrap here, that unanimous consent be provided for letters of support from those who live on the North Slope, as well as letters from the Resource Development Council and the NFIB. Would ask that these be included in the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
The clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, do hereby move to bring to a close debate on the nomination of Matthew E. Orso of North Carolina to be United States District Judge for the Western District of North Carolina, signed by 17 senators.
Under the previous order, the mandatory quorum call under Rule 22 has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Matthew E. Orso of North Carolina to be the United States District Judge for the Western District of North Carolina should be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt-Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines. Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin. Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis. Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray. Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds. Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young. Senators voting in the affirmative: Barrasso, Cassidy, Cornyn, Kramer, Curtis, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Moreno, Murkowski, Scott of South Carolina, Tillis. Senators voting in the negative: Duckworth, Kim, Markey, Murray, Peters, Schatz, Schiff, Welch. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Ms. Blunt-Rochester, no. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Crapo, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Merkley, no. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Ms. Cortez Masto, no. Ms. Also Brooks, no. Mr. Banks, aye. Mr. McConnell, aye. Ms. Smith, no. Mr. Wyden, no.
We have about an hour of speakers in between.
Mr. Langford, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye.
Right.
Mr. Cruz, aye.
Right.
Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Rounds, aye. Mr. Gallego, aye. Ms. Baldwin, no. Mr. Whitehouse, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Fetterman, no. Mr. Kane, aye. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Mr. Paul, aye. Mr. Kelly, no. Mr. Ossoff, no. Mr. Justice, aye. Mr. Warnock, no. Mr. Durbin, Mr. Durbin. Aye. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Young, aye. Ms. Hirono, no. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Sanders, no. Ms. Klobuchar, no. Mr. Sheehy, aye. Mr. Grassley, aye. Ms. Collins, aye.
You're going to get stuck in the chair.
Mr. Schmidt,
This is a calculating move.
aye.
You know what about it? He is a general.
Mr. Marshall, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wicker.
That'd be great.
Aye. Mr. Booker, no. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mrs. Brett, aye. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Cotton, aye. Mr. Padilla, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. King, No. Mrs. Capito, aye. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Graham, aye. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Daines, aye. Mr. Sullivan, aye. Miss Rosen, no. Mr. Hickenlooper, no. Mr. Bennett, no.
The yeas are 56, the nays are 40. The motion is agreed to. Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 8 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week, the day before Thanksgiving, our nation's capital experienced a horrific tragedy. Just blocks from the White House, 2 National Guard members were ambushed by a gunman. One of the victims, 20-year-old Sarah Beckstrom, tragically succumbed to her wounds. The second, 24-year-old Andrew Wolf, is currently fighting for his life. We join thousands of Americans who are praying for him and for a full and complete recovery, lifting up his family and also lifting up the family of Sarah Beckstrom. Now, these 2 young, brave, patriotic Americans answered the call of duty to serve their nation in uniform, and for that, they were gunned down in cold blood. What do we know about the shooting suspect? He is a 29-year-old Afghan national. He entered the country in 2021 during President Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. He is among nearly 200,000 Afghan nationals who were relocated to our country by the Biden administration under Operation Allies Welcome. This program was part of Biden's larger effort to make illegal immigration legal. At the time, my Republican colleagues and I demanded answers from the administration about how they could possibly vet all the evacuees amid this chaotic withdrawal. We must never forget that 13 U.S. service members were murdered by a suicide bomber at the Abbey Gate during the evacuation, including Staff Sergeant Ryan Naus of Tennessee. The Biden administration, however, insisted that the evacuees were properly vetted. The morning after the Abbey Gate bombing, Biden's press secretary, Jen Psaki, told the American people that all Afghan nationals were, and I'm quoting her, screened and vetted prior to being allowed into the U.S., end quote. Well, that was a lie, and a lie that has now cost the life of a U.S. service member. In 2022, an Inspector General report from the Department of Homeland Security found that the Biden administration, and I'm quoting from that report, admitted or paroled evacuees who were not fully vetted into the U.S., noting that some information used to vet evacuees through U.S. government databases was inaccurate, incomplete, or missing, end quote. We can be grateful that President Trump is taking decisive action to strengthen vetting and prevent such a tragedy from ever happening again. He's halted visas for Afghan nationals and bolstered the vetting process for aliens from 19 high-risk countries. This is what it looks like when a president puts the American people first. And Congress should do everything possible to work with DHS and to support these efforts. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the next portion of my remarks be placed separately into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have known for years that big tech has sold out children's safety online for the purpose of making a buck. Their algorithms connect children with drug dealers, pedophiles, and flood their feeds with pro-suicide content. Their AI chatbots sexualize children in role-playing fantasies. Their design features allow children to share their precise real-time location on a map with anyone, including predators eager to track them down. Their entire profit model depends on addicting children to their product, no matter the consequences. They are for doom scrolling by our kids, and every day we're learning more about this appalling abuse and addiction of screens. A recent brief filed by more than 1,800 plaintiffs, 1,800 plaintiffs, including parents and children, shows how Meta knowingly exposed children to unthinkable harms. According to the brief, Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, conducted internal studies showing that social media addiction among minors fuels anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and suicidal thought. We all know that these numbers have soared over the past decade. Anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicide, coming from our kids. The numbers are soaring. So, Meta does some research, but here is the kicker that should disgust every single American. When these findings came out and the results were known, Meta buried the research and misled Congress about the results. As a matter of policy, Meta allegedly refused to remove individuals who engaged in sex trafficking on its platforms until users reported the offender at least 17 times. This is unbelievable. They should never let them on in the first place. But Mr. President, Meta, whether it's Facebook or Instagram, they know that somebody is sex trafficking kids and women, and they still let them on their site. And after they're reported once, they get a hand slap. 5, 10, 15, 16 times they get a hand slap. They get a notice, but they can stay in business. And on the 17th time, they decide, well, that's too much. So they shut them down. And you know what? A lot of those people go in and they set up another account with another name, and they continue this sex trafficking mill. It is disgusting and deplorable and revolting and every other negative adjective you can apply to this. How dare they do this? And how dare Meta let these human traffickers, sex traffickers, drug traffickers use their site to carry out illegal businesses? Now, even when Meta detected child sexual abuse material, that's called CSAM, with 100% confidence, Meta often failed to remove the content. So they knew people were exploiting children. It is illegal. They knew they were being exploited. Children were being exploited. But you know what? They didn't remove it. They let it go. An internal audit even showed that the company knowingly connected minors with potential pedophiles and predators and groomers through its algorithmic follow recommendations. On a single day in 2022, it made such recommendations 1.4 million times. That's an accurate number. You've got a website, you've got a social media platform, and they know they're connecting kids to people that are going to harm and exploit them. And in one single day, they do it 1.4 million times. Total disregard for the children, total disregard for their welfare, total disregard for their being. They allow the exploitation to take place. Now, there are a couple of things that we have learned about these big tech companies. First of all, they cannot be trusted to make their platforms safe by design because meaningful safety measures would cut into their bottom line. These are selfish, greedy people. People with a motto, move fast, break things. You know what they're doing, Mr. President? They are breaking the lives of children and families. Now, this is why Congress must step up and ensure that these companies finally face accountability for the harm they have inflicted on an entire generation of our precious children. Earlier this year, Senator Blumenthal and I reintroduced the bipartisan Kids Online Safety Act. It would ensure children are afforded the same protections from harm in the virtual space that laws we have passed that protect them in the physical world. The Senate's version of COSA would establish a clear duty of care for online platforms to prevent their algorithms from pushing dangers on minors, including sexual abuse, illicit drugs, the promotion of suicide, and eating disorders. That duty of care is critical. Requiring big tech companies to take responsibility for making their own products safer is essential to protecting kids and giving parents peace of mind, and giving parents and kids a toolbox so that they are able to de-link from this algorithmic black box. You know what, Mr. President? It is amazing to me, physical world, if you sell alcohol or tobacco to a kid or expose them to pornography, take them to a strip club, the sheriff's going to come over and they are going to lock your doors and they're going to take you to jail. We've got laws on the books. It's illegal to endanger a child. It's illegal to endanger a child's welfare and well-being. But in the virtual space, these reckless people at these AI companies and social media companies and developing these chatbots that sexualize and carry on sensual conversations with children. These social media platforms that connect kids to alcohol, tobacco, drugs, predators. They go every day about their business, endangering children and using our children as a product every single time they are online. Now, the need to do something about this is why we have now 70 co-sponsors on the Kids Online Safety Act here in the Senate. And last week, our colleagues in the House released a discussion draft of a new version of COSA that would strip out the duty of care. I will tell you, when I looked at that, I thought it looks like they gave it to Meta to mark it up, the way they redlined that, stripping out the duty of care so they could still take care of friends over at the big tech companies. With the Senate version of Kids Online Safety Act, social media platforms would be required to exercise reasonable care in the creation and implementation of any design feature to prevent and mitigate harms to minors where a reasonable and prudent person would agree that such harms were reasonably foreseeable. With the House version, platforms would only be required to establish, implement, maintain, and enforce reasonable policies, practices, and procedures that address such harms, without the duty of care to prevent foreseeable harms. This new requirement is completely unenforceable. Now, Mr. President, let me give you an idea of what this would equate to and what it would compare to in the physical space. Let's just say that our counties and cities and states and the federal government decided that anybody ought to be able to go buy alcohol, tobacco, or drugs anytime they wanted to. Just whatever you want to do, go do it. And kids as young as 7 or 8 years old would go and buy alcohol or drugs or go experience pornographic shows. You can't even take a kid into an X-rated, R-rated movie. But just let's say all those laws were strict. That is what is happening in the virtual space because we do not have those protections in place. And it is so deeply disappointing to me that we have some in the House that say, let's not worry about it. Let's not put any restrictions. You know what? That ought to be left up to parents and teachers and preachers to police this. So, what if in the physical world you took away all of those laws? What if you said we're not going to protect children? What if you said we're not going to, as a society, put any constraints at all on minor children? There is a reason children are referred to as minors. There is a reason they don't get a driver's license till they're age 16. They can't vote until they're 18. There are reasons we have laws to protect those that are vulnerable, to take care of our children. And as you look at what came through the House version, it weakens the standard to prove that big tech companies have knowledgeable harms on their platforms. Mr. President, we know there are harms. We know they've done the research. We know this exists. And we know that their executives want to bury their head in the sand and to play dumb. They think the American people are dumb. They think they're the gods of Silicon Valley. But you know what? People have figured this out, and they love their kids. And they want the federal government to do something about this, to establish standards, to exercise federal preemption, to pass kids' online safety, to make certain that children are going to be protected. And parents want to know the federal government has their back. I yield the floor. Note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alston-Brooks.
Mr. President,
Senator from Hawaii.
I ask unanimous consent to vitiate the quorum call.
Without objection.
Mr. President, when Republicans tell you over and over a period of generations, that they have no interest in protecting people's health care, you should take them seriously. For decades, since the days of Ronald Reagan, they have argued that Medicare is socialism, that Medicaid creates cycles of dependency, that the Affordable Care Act is making health care more expensive when in fact it is doing the opposite. And so you should not be surprised that given the opportunity to extend the Affordable Care Act tax credits and prevent people's premiums from more than doubling starting next month, Republicans do not have the votes to prevent that. Look, this is not complicated. If Congress doesn't act this month, millions of Americans will lose their health care next year because they simply cannot afford to pay hundreds of dollars more every month for the same health care. And tens of millions of people will be forced to cut back on groceries or after-school activities for their kids just so they can keep seeing their doctor. And the only way to prevent the suffering that is about to happen is to pass a clean extension of these credits. There is no other plan. There's a lot of conversation, even on the left, but also on the right, about how to reform the healthcare system. Nobody serious thinks that can be accomplished in the month of December. If we want to have a bipartisan conversation about how to fix the American healthcare system, count me in. This thing is a mess. Between managed care and all of the subsidies and all of the sort of rent-seeking and the idea that maybe not most of the money, but a substantial portion of the money in the American healthcare system goes to people and institutions and processes that don't deliver health care. There's utilization management, there's billing, there are pharmaceutical benefits managers, there are all kinds of rent seekers and people in the American economy, institutions of the American economy, publicly traded companies in the American economy that take a cut out of your money that should be going to health care. That's a very important point. And if there were a bipartisan opportunity to fix that, count me in. Count 47 of us in. But let's not kid ourselves. No one's getting that done by next week. And so the question in front of us is a little more crisp and a little more uncomfortable than, does the American healthcare system work efficiently? Of course it doesn't. But these subsidies allow people to stay alive. These subsidies allow people to stay insured. These subsidies allow people to afford their health care so they can pay their rent or their mortgage or buy their groceries. And so the question in front of us is not some big abstraction about public policy. We are not at some Axios event about what should we do about the American healthcare system. The vote in front of us next week is, do you want people to pay double and triple, or do you not want people to pay double and triple? And so let's stop messing around. Let's stop pretending there's some magical solution that will emerge over the weekend. We've got 47 votes. We got 47 votes. I take some pride in being able to count. It is a weird business I am in, that being able to count is such a unique skill. But I can tell you, we've got 47 votes. So what does that mean? We need 13 votes over there. I can't even find 13 people who will verbalize that they would like to avoid this spike in premiums. We have run out of time. And if Republicans want to solve this, there is a very straightforward path. Mr. President, I ask consent that the following remarks appear in a different part of the record.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this week the House Committee on Energy and Commerce is considering a package of bills aimed at protecting children on social media. For years, children and families across the country have been suffering from the mental health crisis precipitated by social media platforms, and it's well past time that Congress act. But I want to make one thing clear. This is not a question of retooling the settings or empowering users. We know from scientific research and data, as well as anecdotal evidence from every parent, teacher, or kid, that this is too big of a challenge to be solved by tinkering around the edges. Tech companies have specifically designed their platforms to hijack the frontal lobes of impressionable children and feed them a never-ending stream of content that keeps them scrolling for hours. That's not simply going to be undone by more algorithmic choice or more conversations between parents and children at the dinner table. Parents are asking for a very simple thing from their government, because these things are literally built in a lab to hijack a kid's frontal lobe before they are fully formed. And their profit motive, we all know this, the longer they linger, the more eyeballs, the more revenue, the more money, the more profitability. And so the more they addict your kid, the more money they make. And these things are more powerful than a 14-year-old's brain. They just are. And so the question in front of us is not to mandate that when you go into your social media account and you're 12 or you're 15, that you have the ability to tweak the algorithm. They're not going to do it. Maybe 1-2%, some kid at, some fancy pants kid of a professor or a Silicon Valley magnate is going to be no phones and blah, blah, blah. But the rest of us need some help from our government to protect these children. And that's why Senator Cruz and I and many others have developed the Kids Off of Social Media Act. There is no good reason for an 8 or a 9-year-old to be on Instagram or Snapchat. And until and unless companies are mandated by law to enforce some basic rules and stop profiting off of children, they will continue padding their bottom lines. The Kids Off Social Media Act is not some intensely complicated piece of legislation. And that's the problem in the Commerce Committee and the Energy and Commerce Committee on the House side. Everybody, so many smart lawyers and staffers going back and forth and doing 500-page bills and tweak this and tweak that and causes of action, all the rest. This is what this bill does. Minimum age threshold for children to get on social media, okay? And then if you are still a minor but permitted to get on social media, so from the ages of 13 to 18, algorithmic browsing is banned. So it's like the old Facebook, where it's like, it's just your friends, it's like a big group chat. I made a cupcake. Look how cute my dog is. This is a sunset. I had a wipeout surfing. Whatever. Fun, useless, but not damaging. And I promise you, parents across the country, left, right, and center, Ted Cruz and I have a hard time finding areas of agreement. And I like Ted. Katie Britt and I have a hard time finding areas of agreement. And yet, parents across the political spectrum, across geography, believe that the way to protect kids is to simply delay the onset of the use of social media, which we have a perfect right to do under statutory law, and then for those minors who are on social media to turn off the algorithm. And that's what we should pass. Some of those House bills are constructive moves in the right direction, but they are nibbling around the edges. And when we send something to the president's desk, it cannot be nibbling around the edges. This is not just a mental health crisis, and it is. It is a societal emergency. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I spoke earlier this week about the tragic incident that happened over the week of Thanksgiving here in Washington, D.C. 2 National Guardsmen were shot in the line of duty, and one of them died of her wounds. Today, I'd like to spend a little bit more time discussing the perpetrator of this act of violence and how he happened to be in the country in the first place. The man who committed this crime was a 29-year-old Afghan national by the name of Ramunallah Lakanwal. The Biden administration paroled him into the United States in 2021 as part of Operation Allies Welcome. He was not the recipient of any special immigrant visa processed through the Overseas Afghan SIV program. He was later granted asylum after his parole period expired. But I'd like to dwell on the word parole for a minute so people understand exactly how this shooter made his way into the United States and how he come to stay here and commit these crimes. Ordinarily, under immigration law, Congress would be engaged and pass certain immigrant visa legislation saying that you need to meet these criteria, these standards in order to qualify. That is not what happened to the shooter of these 2 West Virginia National Guardsmen. He was paroled into the country, which means that the Biden administration simply allowed him into the country without any sort of background check or any sort of vetting. We're more familiar with the word parole in the criminal law context, which comes to mind when people are released from prison following or demonstrating good behavior. But in immigration law, parole is a provision under the United States law that allows the Secretary of Homeland Security to allow certain aliens, and that would be foreigners, on a case-by-case basis, and that's important, would allow certain aliens on a case-by-case basis to temporarily enter the United States. Aliens who've been paroled into the United States are usually not eligible for entry into the United States or for a visa because they are barred by certain grounds of inadmissibility or removal that apply. Parole is not a lawful immigration status or formal admission to the United States. I know this is fairly technical, but it's really important in this context. This shooter was not admitted to the United States as a result of any legislation that Congress passed or any of us voted for. It was solely done by the Biden administration and by the Department of Homeland Security during his administration. Just as importantly, this parole power, is only to be used in very limited circumstances, such as a medical emergency, or because we find it's in our nation's best interest, such as an individual alien cooperating with law enforcement or in a criminal prosecution. Aliens who are paroled in the United States are only allowed to be here temporarily and under certain conditions prescribed by the Secretary of Homeland Security. Significantly, they do not undergo the same formal screening process as those who apply for a green card or a visa. Parole was never meant to be a vehicle for massive number of immigrants coming into the country, or the sort of categorical parole done by the Biden administration where people from certain countries were admitted by the tens of thousands, literally each month. It is supposed to be done on a case-by-case basis. So what I'm suggesting is these sort of categorical paroles that the Biden administration issued, including the parole which resulted in this shooter being in Washington, D.C. and attacking these two National Guards members, was illegitimate. It was an illegitimate use of this parole authority under U.S. law. The Biden administration's abuse of immigration laws, of course, is well known, and their abuse of parole authority. The very notion of mass parole is what you might call an oxymoron. In other words, it's inconsistent. Mass or categorical and parole. There's an inherent contradiction. Using this authority illegitimately to allow a massive number of immigrants into the country defies the very nature and purpose of this authority. The Biden administration created a number of programs to extend parole status to immigrants from around the world. Under a program known as the CNBC, the Biden administration allowed as many as 30,000 individuals per month from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, as well as their immediate family members. They were admitted under this program of the Biden administration, again, illegitimately using their parole authority to grant categorical or massive entry of these individuals into the United States. Under that program, they were allowed into the United States for a 2-year period of time and received a work permit. The Trump administration rightly terminated this program in March this year. But that's not the only misuse of parole. After the disastrous fall of Afghanistan and bungled evacuation, the Biden administration added insult to injury. Under Operation Allies Welcome, the Biden administration rolled out the welcome mat to Afghan nationals. As of 2023, the Biden administration had brought more than 70,000 Afghan nationals into the United States under this claimed parole authority. Again, parole is only supposed to be used on a case-by-case basis, but the Biden administration, by illegitimately exercising this authority, allowed 70,000 Afghan nationals into the country. What that also means, in particular relevance to this crime committed against these two National Guardsmen, is that there was not the normal sort of vetting process that you would see for refugees or anybody else coming into the country. We knew very little about these individuals, and we didn't check up on them once they got here. We didn't know whether they were criminals, whether they had ties to radical terrorist groups, or anything. Of course, that's pretty consistent for the Biden administration. Their open border policies for 4 years that let basically anybody and everybody who wanted to come to the United States in, including people who were determined to commit crimes and do us harm. For some of these parolees, the U.S. government, under the Biden administration, even allowed them to collect cash welfare benefits, such as supplemental Social Security income, SSI, temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, and supplemental nutrition assistance programs. So not only did they come in unvetted and allowed to stay here for 2 years, given a work permit, and given benefits that are paid for by you and me and the rest of the American taxpayers. A video on the DHS website with information for Afghan nationals details that U.S. Immigration and Customs Service will expedite asylum applications for those paroled under Operation Allies Welcome, and that they need not even comply with the regular application filing deadlines. A cursory review of this program on the website, the Operation Allies Welcome website, exposes that the Biden administration was much more concerned with testing these immigrants for COVID-19 than ensuring they would not otherwise pose a threat to the American people. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General reported that DHS paroled in at least 2 people who were known national security risks, known national security risks. And the Department of Defense Inspector General wrote in another report that Afghan refugees were not vetted by the National Counterterrorism Center, using all the DoD data prior to arriving in the continental United States. Now, when I've learned about this abuse of parole authority within Operation Allies Welcome, I raised the alarm bell. In October of 2024, I co-led a letter, along with my colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, to DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, back in the Biden administration. In this letter, we pressed the administration for answers on how foreign extremists, such as one Afghan national, Nasir Ahmad Tawhidi, who was arrested for his connection to an ISIS plot to commit a violent attack within the United States on Election Day, how people like that were slipping through the cracks in our immigration system. I guess the answer is there weren't cracks, there were yawning gaps that you could drive a truck through, that anybody and everybody who was determined to come here could abuse and commit acts of violence and harm against the American people. The Biden administration had claimed that Tawhidi, who had ties to ISIS, had a special immigrant visa, but that was not true. He never had been vetted for a special immigrant visa, was allowed into the country on parole. Here we go again. And throughout the criminal investigation, the Department of Homeland Security continued to say that, quote, no red flags were raised during the parole vetting process? Well, of course not. If the parole vetting process is virtually non-existent, how do you expect red flags to be raised? The fact that a foreign national who would later collaborate with ISIS on a terrorist plot within the United States raised no red flags during DHS's parole vetting process tells us all we need to know about what that vetting process consisted of. It was obviously not sufficient. At minimum, it was insufficient to ensure that those entering the country did not pose a threat. The letter I referred to a moment ago also referenced the Office of Inspector General report that found that the Department of Homeland Security had no established process for monitoring the Afghan parolee population as their parole periods expire. In other words, they were allowed into the country for ostensibly for a 2-year period of time, given a work permit, given social service benefits, and no follow-up to make sure that after their parole period ended that they returned to their country of origin or pursued some other legitimate pathway to allow them to stay legally in the United States. Now, we sent this letter back in 2024 because of our concern that another foreign extremist might make their way into our country via this parole process and commit some act of violence. And it became increasingly clear during Thanksgiving week that our concerns were not unwarranted. A 29-year-old Afghan national entered our country through the Biden administration's abuse of parole authority under Operation Allies Welcome and murdered one of our National Guardsmen on duty. Last week, Attorney General Bondi, alongside federal and state law enforcement, arrested another Afghan citizen residing in Fort Worth, Texas, for threatening to build a bomb and carry out a suicide attack against Americans. There are many lessons to be learned from this sad experience, this sad episode. We simply cannot ignore the importance of thoroughly vetting for each and every person who enters our country to make sure that we are keeping out radicals who may want to harm Americans or criminals or other people who have no business being in the United States in the first place. These horrific incidents should be a reminder to all of us that the decisions that are made here in Washington have real-life implications on the lives of the people that we represent. And I must say, the federal government failed this young National Guardsman who lost her life during Thanksgiving week. And we don't know how many more potential threats are still out there, because 70,000 Afghan nationals were paroled under this bogus Operation Allies Welcome program by the Biden administration. We don't know how many more potentially dangerous individuals are spread around the country. Last week, an American service woman lost her life because of the Biden administration's abuse of parole authority. President Biden is no longer in office, but the consequences of his reckless immigration policies are still with us, and I fear they will be with us not for days, not for weeks, not for months, but for years and possibly longer. I commend President Trump for freezing processing of asylum and visa applications from Afghan nationals while we figure out what happened and figure out how to fix it. We have to get to the bottom of this in order to make sure that such a tragedy never happens again. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Mexico.
Mr. President, nestled in the far northeast corner of Alaska is one of the wildest and most untouched places left in North America, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. I have been blessed to see this refuge with my own eyes, and I've seen its towering peaks. I've seen the critical habitat on the coastal plain where caribou drop their calves. I've even seen its polar bears. And over the course of a year in the Arctic Refuge, you might also see one of the last great spectacles of migrating caribou, dueling muskox straight out of the Pleistocene, or rare spectacle eiders nesting on the coastal plain. In fact, the Arctic Refuge is home to hundreds of iconic wildlife species, including 200 species of birds that have called this landscape home since long before humans stepped on this continent. Simply put, the Arctic Refuge is the crown jewel of the American National Wildlife Refuge system. And it has been ever since it was set aside in 1960 by President Eisenhower to protect its wildlife and habitat values. But that's only part of its story. The Arctic Refuge is also deeply connected to the traditions and daily life of the people who have lived there for thousands of years, longer than this building, this city, this country have existed. Because the refuge is not just land. For wildlife, it's essential habitat. For many people who live there and are sustained by its caribou, this place is literally their grocery store. It's not just a reminder of the past, it's hope for the future. But that future is at stake. The Arctic Refuge is under threat from the Trump administration's relentless attacks on public lands, attacks that put so-called energy dominance above every other use, every other value. Today, the Senate will vote on a congressional resolution of disapproval to overturn the management plan for the Arctic Refuge. And instead of a targeted approach that emphasizes things like subsistence hunting, wildlife conservation, and a focus on tribal consultation, a vote for this resolution will redundantly open up the entire coastal plain of the refuge to be leased for oil drilling without local input. And I say redundantly because the Trump administration has already overturned this management plan. The Republicans in Congress have already passed legislation requiring this area, a national wildlife refuge, requiring it to be drilled for oil, despite a complete lack of interest by legitimate industry players. Now, we could be discussing ways to lower electricity costs, which are spiraling out of control, or doing something about the skyrocketing healthcare costs in this country right now. But instead, we're talking about industrial oil and gas development in the beating heart of our greatest wildlife refuge, literally developing the place where the porcupine caribou herd drops their calves every year. Now, when Congress first debated whether to allow oil development in the Arctic, America's energy landscape looked very different. We were importing significant amounts of oil, much of it from our political adversaries. Oil prices were rising, and U.S. energy could not meet demand. Yet even in that context, in those challenging years, for decades and across both political parties, Congress recognized the irreplaceable ecological and cultural importance of the Arctic Refuge. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle understood that some places are sacred. Some places are simply too unique and important to sacrifice. And together they kept these lands closed to industrial development. In fact, it was not until 2017 that a Republican majority reversed that long-standing commitment and opened this refuge to exploitation. They turned their backs on the American people who own this refuge and embraced a development anywhere and at any cost approach. Doing so despite the fact that the United States was already experiencing record oil production and was on its way to being a net energy exporter. And now they have done it again in their big, bad bill. But this time, they want more and more. To what end? We know this hasn't worked before. We know previous efforts to offer leases here have actually been a failure. Now, they told us that development of the Arctic refuge would bring in billion with a B, $1 billion to the Treasury to pay off the tax cuts that were in the 2017 bill for billionaires. But as we all remember, that came up a little short. In fact, it came up $993 million short, to be exact. And it's because development in the refuge is so complicated and so expensive. It's costly in time, seasons are short, days can be even shorter, there's not a lot of time to break new ground, there are no roads, no infrastructure even remotely close to this part of the coastal plain. That's why it's estimated that oil prices would have to be at least $75 a barrel just to break even on oil from the refuge. Compare that to today's average cost for a barrel, which is hovering around $60. Legitimate investors knew these pitfalls. In 2023, the 6 largest banks in the United States, the 5 largest banks in Canada, and 29 other international banks all issued policies against financing drilling in the Arctic refuge. The banks. Insurers, too, followed suit. Which is why the second justification that they're using to do this just doesn't make sense. That producing oil in the refuge will make gas cheaper for everyday Americans. You can see from the math that this is not remotely true. If construction and drilling costs are so high that a barrel of oil has to be almost $20 more expensive just to break even, what do you think that does to prices at the gas station when you fill up your car? It doesn't mean cheaper gas. The last thing that they'll tell you is that we have to drill everywhere in America because we're, quote, in an energy emergency. But the truth is the only energy crisis in America is the one that President Trump has created himself. It's the skyrocketing utility bills that Americans are facing because of the Republicans' relentless attacks on affordable, American-made clean energy. Opening precious wilderness to industrial development is not going to fix that, especially when it's to drill for oil that costs so much to produce. Drilling in the Arctic refuge is not going to make energy more affordable. And it seems to me as I stand up here to speak about yet another attack on our public lands, that no place is sacred from this extracted at all costs playbook. Not even wildlife refuges, Mr. President. So what's next? Are we going to develop geothermal energy in Yellowstone? Maybe more uranium mining in the Grand Canyon? I think Teddy Roosevelt must be tired from rolling over in his grave. The bottom line is that the Arctic refuge is too unique, too globally important to develop. It's a wildlife refuge for a reason. Now, proponents love to hide the fact that this is, in fact, a national wildlife refuge. They call it all kinds of things so that they don't have to use the phrase wildlife refuge. They'll call it the 1002 area. They'll call it Anwar. It sounds like someplace in the Middle East you would expect oil and gas production. They don't want us to pay attention to how crazy a prospect developing one of our last remaining untouched landscapes is. The Arctic refuge provides subsistence, fish, and game for people who live in the region. It serves as a seasonal home to species you might see in your own state, species like Arctic terns and all sorts of waterfowl. And it is a remarkable, vast, and breathtaking wilderness that should inspire us to be better stewards of our wildlife heritage. The Arctic Refuge is the crown jewel of our national wildlife refuge system, and it belongs to every single American. It deserves our protection. So I would urge colleagues to vote no on the CRA today. Thank you, Mr. President.